Life in prison. X number of years, no possibility of parole. These are the words you hear me say towards the end of every video. They're condemning words for vicious criminals and wrongdoers for a life behind bars. But what we don't realize is that these very numbers given by the jury at the time of sentencing are finite. Many of these callous killers do eventually walk free. It could be 10, 20, or 30 years from now, but many do make it out. In today's case, the perpetrator has already been out of jail for almost a year after ending an innocent person's life. 17-year-old Mackenzie Cowell was just 2 months away from turning 18. She was a high school student with dreams of working in the beauty industry. But she mysteriously vanished on February 9th of 2010, and her disappearance devastated the community of Wenatchee, Washington. What people didn't expect, though, was that the person behind her disappearance was someone she saw every single day. The terrifying and mind-boggling case of Mackenzie Cowell is going to leave you speechless and angry, because even though the case is solved, you have to wonder if justice was really served. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I post new true crime cases every single week. No drama, no robot narrations, just a story and a crime. So if you want to see some good old-fashioned true crime documentaries, hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and it'll keep you up to date with all of my future videos. Mackenzie Nicole Cowell was born on April 1st, 1992, to parents Reed and Wendy Cowell. Mackenzie lived in Orondo, Washington, and at the time of the case, she was a senior at Wenatchee High School. According to her parents, Mackenzie was a happy and vibrant girl. One thing about Mackenzie was that she loved to dance, and she was even part of the school dance team, Applettes, and she had joined a local dance studio in Wenatchee. In 2010, Mackenzie was busy in her studies and spent time with both of her divorced parents. Her dad, Reed, went on to start a relationship with a woman named Sandy Francis, and her mom, Wendy, got into a relationship with a man named Joey Fisher. Even though this monumental change in the family dynamic can impact any child, Mackenzie was just happy for her parents. Besides, she had her own life to plan. At 17 years old, most young kids struggle with what they want to do in life, what career they want to pursue, and everything else. But Mackenzie knew exactly what she wanted to do. She was an excellent student in school, but she decided to enroll in a cosmetology job training program at the Academy of Hair Design in downtown Wenatchee. Now, hair and makeup were something Mackenzie was passionate about with a capital P. She had dreams of becoming a beautician, and she even modeled at the academy. For Mackenzie, this training was a 2-for-1. She could get hands-on experience working as a cosmetologist while getting that extra credit for her transcript. It's safe to say that Mackenzie had a plan for her future, and she was set on making her dreams come true. Mackenzie was a driven young girl who had massive plans, and she wasn't shy about aiming for the top. Her goals and ambitious nature made her likable by nearly everyone. Mackenzie was born to stand out, and she loved putting herself out there and wasn't the type of person to turn down fun. And by all accounts, Mackenzie had a fulfilling, happy life, and she was on the road to achieving great things. But all of that changed on a fateful day in February of 2010, when Mackenzie left the Academy of Hair Design and didn't return. February in Washington is cold and breezy, with temperatures dropping to around 19 degrees. Well, February 19th of 2010 was a similar day in Washington for Mackenzie. The air had a chilly bite to it, and she was working at the academy. At 3 p.m., Mackenzie decided to go out for a bit, and even asked her friends at the academy if it was okay for her to step out, to which they agreed. CCTV footage caught a bundled-up Mackenzie walking to the parking lot. She got in her 1999 red Pontiac Grand Prix and pulled out moments later. Cell phone records showed that Mackenzie sent a text to her boyfriend, Joaquin, that said, "Hey, what's up?" But sadly, this was the last time Mackenzie would ever use her phone. From the looks of it, Mackenzie didn't look like she was in a hurry, and according to her friends, she'd be gone for only 15 minutes. But more than 15 minutes went by, and there was no sign of Mackenzie. At first, this didn't alarm Mackenzie's friends. They thought she was just running late after changing her plans. Another reason why Mackenzie's friends weren't quick to call the police that day was that on Wednesdays, Mackenzie would meet up with her dad, Reed, for dinner and watch movies all night. It'd been a father-daughter ritual for a long time, so naturally Mackenzie's friends thought that she must have lost track of time with her dad. But what they didn't know was that Mackenzie wasn't with her dad either. In fact, Reed kept waiting for Mackenzie to show up for their dinner, but she never came. At around 5 p.m., a worried Reed bombarded Mackenzie with multiple phone calls and texts, but she didn't answer. At around 8 p.m., which was Mackenzie's curfew, Reed was a mess, and he was extremely worried and scared for his daughter. Knowing Mackenzie as a reliable, responsible, and punctual girl who never missed a curfew and always answered her phone no matter how busy she was, Reed knew that this wasn't normal behavior. Deciding not to wait any longer, Reed reported 17-year-old Mackenzie Cowell missing. Fortunately, the detectives jumped into action right away, as Reed voiced his concerns and worries to them that Mackenzie hadn't made it home. The investigators decided to look for Mackenzie everywhere. They checked in with her friends, her mom Wendy, and even her boyfriend Joaquin, but Mackenzie had seemingly vanished into thin air with no evidence left behind. Her car was also nowhere to be found, and she hadn't returned to the academy either. All of the calls on Mackenzie's phone were going to voicemail, and with every passing minute, the Cowell family felt a deep pit of fear growing inside of them. They didn't want to believe it, but their minds couldn't help but wander to the possibility that something terrible had happened to Mackenzie, or that she was in danger. Well, things for the Cowell family only went south from this point, and it all started with a phone call. It wasn't from Mackenzie like they were hoping, though. It was from the police. The call from the police was about a bizarre discovery. See, a local resident had found an abandoned red car near his driveway. The area was near Mission Ridge, and it was about 40 miles away from Mackenzie's home in Orondo. The investigators soon took the car in, and the license plates were checked, and the car was registered under Reed's name. And when they looked at the model, they knew that it was Mackenzie's Pontiac Grand Prix. But there was no sign of Mackenzie, and finding her abandoned car was not looking good for the missing young girl. Inside the car, Mackenzie's handbag was found, but her phone, keys, and debit card were missing. By the car, there were a single set of footprints in the dirt. The detectives took in everything and decided to thoroughly inspect the car while a whirlwind of questions was going through everyone's mind. Why would Mackenzie frequent a remote area that wasn't familiar to her and abandon her car? And where were her belongings? The police, as well as the Cowell family, now knew for certain that something was terribly wrong, and Mackenzie's disappearance was no longer just a missing person case. With the discovery of Mackenzie's car, a full-blown search was held, including ground and air searches with the help of a helicopter to find any clues. The investigators even turned to the FBI for assistance in finding Mackenzie, and volunteers from the community looked far and wide for her. But 4 days after Mackenzie disappeared, another discovery was made. It was horrific, and it deepened the Cowell family's fear. On the banks of the Columbia River near Quincy, Washington, at a resort community about 20 miles away from Wenatchee, a woman's body was found. 50 yards away from the body was a vacant house, which was for sale at the time. The woman was fully clothed in the black academy uniform that was the same as the one Mackenzie wore on the day of her disappearance. Her feet were in the water, and at a distance, there was discarded duct tape and multiple trash bags. Soon after this discovery, tragically, the woman was identified as 17-year-old Mackenzie Cowell. Her body was taken in for an autopsy, and the results showed that Mackenzie had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. But her cause of death was strangulation and wounds to the neck. What's even more chilling was that the murder weapon, a long and sharp serrated knife, was found lodged in her shoulder. Thankfully, her autopsy revealed that there were no signs of assault. After the tragic discovery of Mackenzie's body, her family got to know about the horrible news of her passing. Mackenzie's parents were left grieving their daughter's tragic demise, and they couldn't believe that someone had done something so brutal to Mackenzie, a young, bright girl who had never hurt anyone. The Cowell family, at that point, knew that they needed closure, and the only way they were going to get justice for their daughter was by making the wrongdoer pay. The police assembled the Mackenzie Cowell Task Force, and it was tasked with finding potential suspects and persons of interest in Mackenzie's case. The investigators initially suspected none other than Mackenzie's boyfriend, Joaquin, and he agreed to take a polygraph test, but failed, which raised suspicion in the minds of the police. They also suspected Mackenzie's stepfather, Joey, as the two had gotten into a pretty heated argument the day before she went missing. But the two men were both soon cleared by the police, and they both had airtight alibis, so the detectives were back to square one. The investigators interviewed almost 800 people and received multiple leads. The case of Mackenzie Cowell became the largest multi-agency investigation in the Wenatchee area since 1997. But the detectives soon received a bizarre lead, and it came from a woman named Liz Reed. Her recollection of events was believable, but she turned out to be an unreliable source since she was a drug addict, dealer, and a police informant, as well as a college student. Though I'm not sure how the college student thing really plays into this. But according to Liz, Mackenzie had been killed by two other drug dealers, Sam Cuevas and Emmanuel Serros, in a mistaken identity case. Liz even went as far as stating that she saw a snuff film and that the two men admitted to killing Mackenzie by saying, quote, "I choked her to shut her up." Now, the reason why investigators believed Liz's version of events was that she was able to describe the murder weapon before it was made public, so it wasn't something everyone knew. Moreover, Liz gave the police a ring that apparently belonged to Mackenzie, and they confirmed this by pulling up a past picture of her wearing this exact ring, even though Mackenzie's parents claimed they'd never seen it. When asked where she got the ring from, Liz claimed that she was instructed by Sam to go to a dump site to get it. But soon after this confession was made, Liz claimed she'd made the whole thing up, and detectives were able to confirm that neither she nor the two men that she had mentioned had any link to Mackenzie whatsoever, nor were any of these people at the scene of the crime on the day that Mackenzie lost her life. With a highly confusing case and leads that hit dead ends, the detectives were left baffled, but they still didn't stop looking. The evidence they had collected thus far had to give them a clue, so they combed through each and every one until they came across one particular letter, and the information in it would turn the case on its head. The most pivotal lead the investigators received from the public was a letter from a police informant named Theo Keyes. According to Theo, his friend Christopher Wilson was behind Mackenzie's disappearance. So where were Theo and Christopher? And did the letter really have something to do with Mackenzie's passing? Well, as far as Theo was concerned, he had a history of mental illness and was currently serving jail time for inappropriate public behavior. So by the looks of it, the detectives were getting major deja vu from this tip. But they decided to look into it nonetheless, and they were glad they did, because there were a lot of coincidences in this tip, and specifically Christopher Wilson. Not much is known about Christopher Scott Wilson, but what we do know is that he was actually a fellow student at the Academy of Hair Design, the same school where Mackenzie was enrolled. He was a 29-year-old man with dyed black hair and a gothic aura about him. From the looks of it, he seemed to be a normal, quiet guy. But in Theo's letter, it was stated that Chris had an unhealthy fascination with death and serial killers. Chris also had an obsession with the crime drama series Dexter. Chris also idolized Hannibal Lecter from the movie The Silence of the Lambs, and he had a tattoo of him on his arm. Now, liking morbid things doesn't exactly make anyone a textbook murderer, but this next bit might leave you feeling uneasy. See, when the investigators looked into Chris's background, they found out that he frequented various online serial killer forums. Investigators also found out that Chris worked at Telford's Chapel of the Valley, a morgue in East Wenatchee. According to friends, Chris had claimed that he enjoyed, quote, cutting people up, which is just insane to hear. So on August 11th of 2010, Chris was called in for an interview, and initially he was very cooperative. He said that he didn't know Mackenzie as anyone other than a fellow student, although the letter from Theo stated that Chris apparently had a crush on Mackenzie, and that the two were in a budding relationship. But no one can confirm this bit of information, so take it as you will. Chris, during the interview, even agreed to give his DNA, and when it was tested with the DNA found on the duct tape at the scene, lo and behold, it was a match. All of these revelations were pinning Chris as the possible suspect in Mackenzie's untimely death. In October, Chris was brought in for another interview, and when asked about his DNA matching the DNA at the place where Mackenzie's body was found, he stopped cooperating and talking altogether and demanded a lawyer. On October 6th, Chris was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and held on $1 million bail. But DNA wasn't the only thing that caused Chris to be arrested. See, on the day that Mackenzie exited the academy, another person followed out shortly after, and it was none other than Chris. Another report said that a man matching Chris's description was seen where Mackenzie's car was abandoned, and this couldn't have been a coincidence. If that wasn't enough, Chris's former home, which was a rented apartment located just 3 blocks away from the academy, was also searched by the police, and at first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. until a luminol test was conducted. It glowed in one specific location that was covered in carpet. Even though the apartment was cleaned after Chris moved out, this evidence was a jackpot for the police. Under the carpet, there was a sizable patch of dried up blood, and when this blood was tested, it was a match to Mackenzie's. Moreover, cell phone data showed that Mackenzie's phone last pinged from the exact location of Chris's apartment between 3 and 3:42 p.m. on the day of her disappearance. In the midst of the investigation, someone came forward with their own experience with Chris before Mackenzie's disappearance and subsequent passing, and it was safe to say that it was anything but pleasant. A woman named Shauna Novak came forward and claimed that Chris had tried to strangle her at a party once to the point of unconsciousness, which is terrifying. When she demanded that he stop, Chris apologized and said that he didn't mean to harm her. I'd love to know how the situation actually played out because this whole scenario doesn't even add up to me. But anyway, Shauna was obviously left traumatized by this, and she was certain that Chris was trying to harm her. Had she not fought back, who knows what Chris would have done. Evidence was piling up against Chris at this point, and the investigators were certain that they had their man. But there was one other twist that revealed more about Chris and his involvement in Mackenzie's death. In December of 2011, the police made another arrest, and this person was Chris's ex-girlfriend, Tessa Shileman. She was charged with helping Chris hide any trace of the crime. See, the investigators went through Chris's computer, and they found numerous photos and videos of Tessa. They were disturbing because Tessa was posing as a corpse in the same place on the carpet where the bloodstain was found. The investigators also found a video on Tessa's phone, and it showed Chris walking around the apartment with Tessa on June 24th of 2010. When the camera panned to the carpet, a large reddish-brown stain was visible. Another video, recorded 4 days later, showed Chris walking around the apartment asking, quote, if it was clean. Tessa's answer to this was chilling, as she proceeded by saying, yes, considering what happened. It's vague, but knowing what we know now, it is a haunting statement. Phone records later showed that Chris and Tessa talked to each other at around 3:32 p.m. on February 9th, but that's not all. Tessa and Chris proceeded to call each other 5 more times that very evening, and Chris even borrowed Tessa's car even though he had a fully functioning car of his own. Also, Tessa's current boyfriend, who happened to live in the same area where Mackenzie's body was found near Columbia River, said she called him on February 9th at around 9 p.m. She asked him to pray for her as, quote, something bad had happened. Tessa's car was searched for DNA, and even though a knife and cigarette butts were found inside, the DNA didn't match what was found at the crime scene. But investigators had a lot of evidence against Chris, and he was awaiting trial. Chris's charges were changed from second-degree murder to first-degree murder in April of 2011. Before the trial, Chris was offered a plea deal in which he would be charged with 6.5 years for pleading guilty to first-degree manslaughter. But shockingly, he rejected the deal. Chris's defense lawyer was none other than John Henry Brown, and if you're a true crime fiend, then you would know that John Henry Brown is one of the most popular criminal defense attorneys in Seattle. He's defended several infamous serial killers and high-profile defendants, including Ted Bundy, Colton Harris Moore, better known as the Barefoot Bandit, and many others. Chris's defense was built on the fact that the blood found in his former apartment was planted by the police. For some reason, the prosecution wasn't allowed to bring up Chris's work history in a funeral home, his eccentric obsession with Dexter, and even his alarming Hannibal Lecter tattoo. The prosecution, on the other hand, speculated that Chris had somehow lured Mackenzie into his apartment where he ended her life. Now, truthfully, we don't know whether Mackenzie willingly met with Chris or if she was lured. But at the end of the day, both individuals left the academy separately, and there were no messages of any form of communication between the two. After ending Mackenzie's life, the prosecution believed that Chris moved her body from his apartment to the Columbia River. He then abandoned her car near Mission Ridge. In the end, Chris was offered another plea deal, in which he would be sentenced to 14 years in prison for first-degree manslaughter of Mackenzie Cowell. While it may seem strange, this plea deal he accepted. Christopher Wilson was charged with first-degree manslaughter, first-degree robbery, and second-degree assault in an unrelated case and was sentenced to 14 years and 3 months in prison. All that time, Chris maintained his innocence, claiming that he only agreed to the plea deal because he believed that he wouldn't get a fair trial. I feel like a more accurate way to have said this is that as the trial rolled on, Chris began to realize just how much evidence the prosecution had against him, so he chickened out. As for Tessa, she didn't get punished, and she was free to go scot-free. It was concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to prove whether Tessa was involved in Mackenzie's passing or not. But it's weird knowing that she and Chris talked on the phone multiple times on February 9th, the cryptic yet creepy videos, and the call that she made to her boyfriend. Did Tessa barely dodge a bullet? Did she really have no idea about Chris ending Mackenzie's life? Sadly, we'll never know. There's a very real chance Chris had just made up some crazy story about the big stain in the floor, and Tessa believed the story and played along as a genuinely innocent joke. But we'll never truly know. Not long after his sentence, Chris filed a motion to withdraw his guilty plea, but it was rejected by the Washington Court of Appeals. He was incarcerated at Larch Correction Center, then later transferred to Monroe Correctional Center, and was eligible for parole in 2023. On December 11, 2023, Christopher Wilson was released from prison, having served his sentence. He's required to report to a community custody officer for the next 3 years, and he's placed on probation until December of 2026. Following Mackenzie's death, a memorial service was held on February 25, 2010 in Wenatchee. Almost 1,800 people were in attendance, and a tribute was paid to Mackenzie by her high school dance team before setting hundreds of purple and pink balloons into the sky. Tearful speeches and mentions of Mackenzie left everyone feeling vacant and agonized. Mackenzie's family goes through bouts of pain and suffering whenever they remember her cheerful and her genuine smile. Mackenzie had so much to look forward to in her life, and she would have made her mark on the world, but for now, the Cowell family was left to pick up the pieces after Mackenzie's departure, and they're still reeling from the haunting absence of such a vibrant soul in their lives. Ultimately, this case leaves you seesawing between fulfillment and dissatisfaction. Did Mackenzie really get justice? Well, yes and no. Yes, because the perpetrator was caught, but no, because 14 years is nowhere near enough, and the fact that he's a free man today makes everything about this case all the more grim and terrifying. It's scary to believe that despite DNA and multiple other damning pieces of evidence, Chris's family stood by him. There are a lot of people out there supporting Chris and slandering the justice system for convicting an innocent person. But here's the thing, if you really give him the benefit of the doubt, there is a genuinely small but genuine chance that Chris may have been innocent all along. For example, as far as we know, Chris had no known relationship with Mackenzie. We know that they went to the same school, but that's it. There were rumors that the two were beginning some sort of romance, but literally zero evidence for this ever popped up. We don't even have any evidence that the two had ever spoken a single word to each other in the past. Worse yet, many people believe Mackenzie's mother's boyfriend may have been behind her death, as the day before Mackenzie disappeared, she had a big fight with her mother and left the house after declaring to her mother she either pick her or her boyfriend, because she couldn't have both. While the boyfriend did have a supposedly solid alibi for the night of the attack, alibis have been proven false multiple times in the past, so you have to wonder. But the biggest piece of evidence of all actually belongs to Chris's claims that the police planted the blood in his apartment. There's a chance he might be telling the truth. See, the amount of injuries that Mackenzie sustained means that she would have lost an incredible amount of blood during the attack. But the amount found in his apartment, according to some reports, was very, very small. Is this evidence that it was planted? Or is this evidence that his apartment wasn't the original crime scene? Or is it evidence that he covered his apartment in plastic, but unknowingly left a small hole somewhere? We just really don't know. I'm certainly not defending Chris in all of this. I do think he did it. But you have to admit, there is a little bit of room for reasonable doubt. But if Chris really is behind the crime, and I believe he is, what's so frustrating is why? Why did Chris take Mackenzie's life? There's literally no motive. This case is just tragic. Even if the perpetrator did their time, you can't help but feel that the punishment Chris received for ending Mackenzie's life was nothing more than a slap on the wrist. What Mackenzie's family must be feeling, knowing that their daughter's killer is now free, is beyond comprehension. And we can only hope that they find peace and solace and the memories Mackenzie made with them in her very, very short 17 years of life. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Sarah Drummond and Dave H. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's currently the best way you can support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.